Wow. Starting today, it's been an entire year since I started reviewing. Sure, I haven't made another video review in quite some time, but that's what happens when certain parts of your life cut into your time. A lot of you who followed me since the Pepper Ann review I did last year may be wondering, what drove me to review cartoon shows that I remembered as a kid? The answer is simple. Much like the majority of other shows I reviewed on this channel, Pepper Ann was a good show that got less attention than I think it deserved. The same can be said for other shows I looked at, as well as other certain shows and movies I'll eventually get to in the future. With that said, it's time for yet another underrated Disney series, only this time in the form of a video game. This is the first time I ever take a look at a video game for a review, but to understand my reason for doing this, you have to understand how the idea for this review came about. There's a reviewer on the internet I know named Derek Alexander who until December of last year was known as the Happy Video Game Nerd. He's made a lot of good reviews on old school video games that are considered underrated gems. The one review that made me script this one is his retrospective on Disney Capcom games. Technically, the retrospective came about because of his reviews on both DuckTales and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers on the NES, as well as their respective sequels. Growing up in the late 90s to early 2000s, I was big on Disney at the time, and I even reviewed some really underrated Disney cartoons, like Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, The Weekenders, and Disney's Gargoyles, which I still think is my best review thus far. And with some of these shows came video games based on their franchises. Respective franchises, I should say. But there's one series that I think should not go unnoticed, and that particular series is the subject of today's review. Disney's PK Out of the Shadows. Or rather, just Disney's PK as it says on the title screen when you start the game. Disney's PK was released in 2002 for the PlayStation 2 and the Nintendo GameCube. That's just when it was released, by the way. It wasn't until 2007, when I was still in middle school, when I discovered it on a shelf of used games at the local GameStop. As of now, I own the GameCube version, though aside from different console releases and control configurations, it's generally the same game no matter which version you play. Normally, at this point of the review, I'd give a short and detailed explanation on the backstory of how the creation of this game was brought about, but the problem is, I found little to no info on its backstory, and the only thing I could find is that the origins for PK were from a comic series that Disney themselves produced, and that series came about because of the main hero, PK, who in this universe is the alter ego of Donald Duck, though in the original comic series his name was Paper Inic, though I just assumed the name was just shortened so no one would have trouble trying to pronounce it correctly. Anyway, back to Disney's PK. The story for this game is that Donald Duck, voiced by Tony Anselmo, is working as a security guard at Duck Lair Tower, a building purchased off-screen by Uncle 1% himself, Scrooge McDuck, though he doesn't appear at all in this game, so don't expect a cameo from him anytime soon. We do, however, get a short cameo from both Daisy Duck, voiced by Tress MacNeille, and Donald's three nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, of DuckTales fame, voiced by Russi Taylor, who is also the voice of Minnie Mouse. Donald falls asleep on the job and has a short dream sequence with Daisy and his nephews teasing him. Of course, it pisses him off, and then he raves about wanting to be a superhero to prove he isn't worthless. He then wakes up to find a floating, talking duck head inside a bubble known as Computer One, who learns of his desire and transports him to his base of operations. He instructs Donald to stand on the yellow circle behind him and to stay still. Donald reluctantly complies as Computer One activates his machine, and hilarity ensues when Donald is shown without his uniform on, implying that Computer One had pressed a wrong button in the process. After a few more attempts, Donald is finally put into his superhero outfit, which becomes his main outfit throughout the rest of the game, and from what I can tell, it certainly gives me Batman animated vibes, and I think it's easy to see why. In fact, it almost makes me think that he should do a crossover with Darkwing Duck. It'd make sense seeing how Darkwing is basically Disney's equivalent to Batman, only if he was more comedic and less dark. Meanwhile, in the outskirts of space, a huge spacecraft locates Earth and begins preparing for an invasion. These soldiers are an alien empire known as the Avronians and come in a variety of at least 3 categories according to the game's logic. First, there's the Cool Flame, the generic foot soldier of this game's universe, which takes a few shots to kill. Then, there's the standard Avronian soldier, who's not that different from the Cool Flame, only slightly bigger in size, and takes a bit more abuse than the Cool Flame. Finally, we have the Avronian soldiers on gliders, slightly resembling the galaxy gliders from Power Rangers in space, and take the same amount of damage as the standard soldiers, though because they're on gliders, they take a bit more time and have stronger weapons, so don't get cocky. The Avronians are given the order to invade Earth, the order being given by General Zondag and Scientific General Zoster, the commanding officers leading the attack. When Computer 1 learns of an invasion taking place, he sends Donald to another base in what looks to be a winter base location for some on-the-job training, along with giving him his new nickname, PK. Donald asks what PK is, and is given a new voice as well, provided by voice acting veteran Rob Paulsen, who has done countless voiceover like PJ, Pete's son, from Goof Troop, Pinky from Pinky and the Brain, and Yakko Warner from Animaniacs, just to name a few. Once he reaches his destination, Donald, now called PK, begins his training, and this is where the game starts. PK Out of the Shadows is a 3D-styled third-person shooter and platformer, almost very similar to the likes of Super Metroid, though surprisingly, this was one game by Disney that was not associated with Nintendo, despite being released on the system they had at the time, which was the GameCube. It was just a port of the PS2 version, because the PlayStation 2 version was made first, I think, anyway. As for the controls, I'll be discussing the layout of the GameCube version since that's the one I'm familiar with. The analog stick moves PK around, and the farther you tilt the analog stick in that direction, the faster PK will run. The A button makes him jump, and when you get the appropriate upgrade, if A is pressed a second time and held down, he will prolong his jump with his jet propulsor, which can help him reach ledges he can't get to with a single jump. There are also segments in the game where he can use the propulsor to go up low-gravity platforms. The B button makes PK shoot lasers from the device on his arm called the X-Transformer. No, not that kind of transformer. The L button lets you look in a first-person perspective, though it doesn't always work in certain areas. The R button allows PK to target nearby enemies or destructible objects. When locked on to said enemies or objects, tilting the C-stick left and right allows PK to toggle back and forth if there's more than one. PK's X-Transformer draws similarities in different ways from Samus's arm cannon, and the upgrades you collect throughout the game is also done very similarly to Super Metroid, as well as the upgrades themselves. I could just go ahead and tell you what the upgrades are and what the main function of each upgrade is, but I feel like that may spoil the gaming experience for you. If you really want to know what these upgrades can do once you get them, I recommend you find a copy of the game yourself. Like I said earlier, it's available for the PlayStation 2 and the Nintendo GameCube, and aside from controller layout, both versions are pretty much the same. However, at the end of the day, I personally think that it's a shame this franchise never caught on. But hopefully I've redeemed it. However, this game does have its faults. As I said before, the enemies you face in the game take a few hits to kill. The hardest enemies being the Avronian soldiers on gliders because they have the strongest weapons, and if you screw up just once, you're bound to die in a matter of seconds, though it's not impossible to come out on top. This game also shares a common problem that was addressed in Batman Arkham Asylum, in which the boss fights are the weakest point of the game overall. However, in PK's case, there are only 2 boss fights, one with Zoster and one with Zondag at the end. The boss fights themselves aren't terrible, but are unforgiving if you have no idea what you're doing. It's a simple matter of learning their patterns, as well as some trial and error here and there. In conclusion, this game, despite its linearity, has its share of different gaming tropes. It's essentially an action-adventure, third-person shooter, platformer, and exploratory game all in one. And in my personal opinion, this is what both Metroid Prime for the GameCube and Kid Icarus Uprising for the 3DS should have been, and how both games should have handled. Yes, you heard me right. As far as Metroid Prime goes, I really didn't like the first-person shooter approach with it, also counting its two sequels. And despite what Nikon Aqua Magna will tell you, Metroid Prime may have had a layout that's like its side-scrolling counterparts, but in the long run was more or less Nintendo's answer to Microsoft's Halo series, which at this point is now a zombie franchise, seeing how no recent games in the series have been either announced nor released after Halo 4, which despite its number is the 5th entry in the series. No disrespect, Nick, I'm sure you liked Prime, and that series has its fans, but man oh man, PK had a better handle on what Prime should have been, and this is the reason I think PK was the better game between the two. It plays almost exactly like a 3D-styled Metroid game that isn't Other M, and is a damn fine Metroid clone at that. And so, my score for the game is 7.5 out of 10. Not the best game ever, but still fun to play. I'd recommend searching online for a copy unless you have luck finding it at your local flea market or depending on what GameStop you go to. It's worth trying out, though a bit pricey, running at about $20 at best online. With that said, I'm Ultra VFox, and thanks for watching.